The rupee rejected, why Russia just forced India to pay for oil in Yuan. When Moscow found itself cut off from the global financial system, it had to improvise. Overnight, one of the world's largest energy exporters was locked out of the very infrastructure that keeps international commerce alive. But now, in a stunning reversal, Russia has told one of its biggest customers, India, that their currency is no longer welcome. If New Delhi wants to keep the oil flowing, it will have to pay in Chinese yuan. This isn't just a trade spat, it's a signal, a crack in the financial order that has governed the planet for decades, and it raises a question that echoes far beyond Moscow and New Delhi. Is the era of dollar dominance finally beginning to unravel? If you want to stay informed on the shifts reshaping global power, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's dive in. The dollar's iron grip on global trade. For more than 70 years, the United States dollar has sat at the center of the world economy. It became the default currency for international transactions after World War II, when the Bretton Woods Agreement effectively crowned it king. Later, in the 1970s, Washington struck a deal with Saudi Arabia and other oil producers: sell your petroleum in dollars, and we'll provide security and stability. This arrangement, known as the petrodollar system, turned every barrel of oil into a vote of confidence in American currency. Today, the dollar's reach is staggering. 14 sovereign nations and 5 territories use it as their official currency. More than 50 other countries see it circulating widely, even if it's not legally recognized. Among the nearly 200 nations on Earth, the dollar accounts for roughly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. It is the lingua franca of finance. But the dollar's dominance isn't just about trust or convenience, it's also about infrastructure. Specifically, a system called SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. SWIFT is the messaging network that allows banks around the world to communicate and settle transactions. It's the neural system of global finance, and the United States, along with its allies, has significant influence over it. This gives Washington a powerful tool. If you're cut off from SWIFT, you're essentially cut off from the global economy. Your money might exist on paper, but you can't spend it. You can't buy goods. You can't pay suppliers. You're financially isolated. Iran, a cautionary tale. The consequences of being kicked out of SWIFT are not theoretical. They're devastatingly real. Take Iran. In 2012, under pressure from Washington, SWIFT severed ties with Iran's central bank and several of its largest financial institutions. The impact was immediate and brutal. Iran's oil exports, which had averaged around 2.5 million barrels per day in 2011, collapsed to just 1.45 million barrels by 2013. That's nearly a 45% drop. Oil revenues, the lifeblood of the Iranian economy, plummeted by more than 40%. The currency went into free fall. The Iranian rial lost 146% of its value against the dollar. Inflation surged past 42%, devastating ordinary citizens. Supermarket shelves emptied, savings evaporated. Then, in 2018, things got worse. President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States from the Iran nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions. SWIFT was ordered to disconnect not just Iran's central bank, but 50 other Iranian banks as well, including those handling oil export payments. By 2019, Iran's crude oil exports had dropped below 500,000 barrels per day. The economy shrank by nearly 7%. To survive, Iran turned to the shadows. It assembled a so-called gray fleet of aging tankers with murky ownership, smuggling oil to buyers willing to take the risk. It began experimenting with alternative payment methods: Chinese yuan, gold, even cryptocurrency. None of these were ideal, but they were the only options left. Iran's story is a stark reminder: control the payment system, and you control the economy. Russia's turn. Fast forward to February 2022. Russia launches its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Within days, The West responds with a coordinated barrage of sanctions unlike anything seen in modern history. 7 major Russian banks are expelled from SWIFT. Roughly $300 billion in Russian foreign exchange reserves, money held in Western banks, is frozen. European nations, which had long relied on Russian natural gas and oil, announce plans to phase out imports. The United States bans Russian crude entirely. For Russia, this was an economic earthquake. Moscow scrambled to adapt. It mobilized a fleet of over 600 aging tankers, many of them uninsured and operating in legal gray zones, to keep oil flowing to buyers willing to defy Western pressure. It pushed the ruble as a settlement currency for energy deals, and crucially, it turned to 2 non-Western currencies, the Indian rupee and the Chinese yuan. At first, the damage seemed manageable. By 2023, Russia's crude oil export volumes had only declined by about 3% compared to pre-war levels. But revenue was a different story. Despite shipping nearly the same amount of oil, Russia's earnings dropped by almost 30%. Western sanctions had forced Moscow to sell at steep discounts, and the logistical costs of circumventing the system ate into profits. Still, Russia found willing buyers, chief among them, India. India's oil boom. Before the war, India imported relatively modest amounts of Russian oil, around 1% of its total. But when Western sanctions drove down the price of Russian crude, New Delhi saw an opportunity. By 2022, Indian imports of Russian oil had surged to an average of just over 1 million barrels per day. By 2025, that figure had nearly doubled, reaching 1.8 million barrels per day. To put that in perspective, Russia now supplies roughly 35% of India's total oil imports, worth approximately $45 billion annually. In just 3 years, Russia leapfrogged Iraq to become India's single largest oil supplier. It's honestly one of the most dramatic shifts in global energy trade in recent memory. And India wasn't just buying cheap oil, it was making money off it. Indian refiners would purchase Russian crude at a discount, process it into diesel and gasoline, and then resell the refined products to Europe, often at prices slightly below market rates but still highly profitable. Each ton of refined product generated roughly $380 in net profit. Altogether, this refining and resale model brought India an estimated $16 billion in additional annual revenue. It was a win-win. Russia got a buyer, India got cheap energy and export income. Everyone was happy, until they weren't. The Rupee Problem. At first, India paid for Russian oil in US dollars or UAE dirhams. But in 2025, Washington began applying pressure. The Trump administration threatened to impose a 25% tariff on Indian goods if New Delhi continued facilitating sanctions evasion. Faced with the prospect of losing access to the American market, India switched to paying in rupees. This seemed like a clever workaround. Russia would accept rupees, India would avoid US sanctions, and bilateral trade would continue. But there was a problem, actually, several problems. First, the rupee is not an international currency. It's not widely accepted outside India. Russian companies and banks holding rupees couldn't easily spend them abroad. The money just piled up in Indian bank accounts. Trapped. By mid-2025, Russia had accumulated over 4.5 trillion rupees in Indian banks. That's roughly $54 billion, equivalent to 7% of India's entire foreign exchange reserves. And it was, well, essentially useless. Why? Because the Reserve Bank of India tightly controls the flow of rupees out of the country. Even if Russian entities wanted to invest the money in Indian bonds or infrastructure projects, they'd face bureaucratic hurdles and approval processes that could take months or even years. Meanwhile, the rupee itself was depreciating. In 2025 alone, the rupee fell more than 15% against the dollar. That currency drop wiped out roughly $8 billion in value from Russia's rupee holdings. For Moscow, the situation was untenable. They were selling oil, but getting paid in a currency they couldn't use, and that was losing value by the day. Enter the yuan. On October 7th, Russia made its position clear. From now on, all oil transactions with India must be settled in Chinese yuan. The message was blunt, and it sent shockwaves through New Delhi. But why the yuan? What makes China's currency a better option than India's? Several reasons. First, stability. The yuan's exchange rate, while not entirely free-floating, is far more stable than the rupee's. It's managed by the People's Bank of China within a controlled band, which means businesses can plan with greater confidence. Second, liquidity. The yuan is the fifth most traded currency in the world. It's used in global trade, backed by China's massive economy, and increasingly integrated into international payment systems. Russia can actually spend yuan on Chinese goods, on trade with third countries, or by converting it into other currencies if needed. Third, infrastructure. China has invested heavily in building an alternative to SWIFT, called the Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, or CIPS. While it's not yet as comprehensive as SWIFT, it's growing fast and allows for direct yuan-ruble transactions without involving the dollar. This saves Russia an estimated 2 to 3% in exchange costs, a significant sum when you're moving billions of dollars worth of energy. Fourth, and perhaps most important, Russia needs Chinese goods. Under Western sanctions, Moscow can't easily buy advanced technology, industrial equipment, or consumer goods from Europe or the United States. But China can supply almost everything: chips, engines, automobiles, turbines, machinery. China is the world's largest manufacturing power and the only country with a complete industrial supply chain. If Russia holds yuan, it can keep buying what it needs. Will India comply? So the question becomes, will India accept Russia's demand? On the surface, it's a bitter pill. India has long aspired to elevate the rupee's status as an international currency. It has signed rupee settlement agreements with about 20 countries, mostly in South Asia and Africa. It has pushed for the rupee to be included in BRICS-led initiatives for multi-currency trade. But progress has been slow. The rupee still accounts for only about 8% of loans issued by the BRICS New Development Bank compared to 62% for the yuan. The truth is, India's economy faces structural challenges that limit the rupee's appeal. High inflation, chronic fiscal deficits, and a volatile exchange rate make foreign investors and trade partners wary. And India's massive dependence on energy imports, it imports over 80% of its oil, means it doesn't have the leverage to dictate terms. But here's the kicker: India can't afford to lose Russian oil. Russian crude is still about 30% cheaper than the international benchmark price. According to a long-term supply agreement signed in November 2025, Russia agreed to sell crude to India at $3 per barrel below the reference price. That discount alone saves India roughly $17 billion annually in foreign exchange. And then there's the refining profit. By importing cheap Russian crude, processing it, and reselling the products, India generates an additional $16 billion per year. Losing access to Russian oil would be a financial catastrophe. So despite public statements emphasizing the importance of rupee settlements, India is quietly shifting. Indian Oil Corporation, the country's largest state-owned oil company, has already completed multiple batches of Russian crude purchases settled in yuan. Each transaction is worth between $300 million and $500 million. The model is simple. Prices are quoted in dollars, but payments are made in yuan. Meanwhile, other major Indian oil firms, Hindustan Petroleum and Bharat Petroleum, have applied to the Reserve Bank of India for yuan settlement quotas of 5 billion and 3 billion yuan, respectively. The writing is on the wall. India is moving toward yuan payments, whether it likes it or not. The bigger picture: de-dollarization accelerates. Russia's rejection of the rupee and embrace of the yuan isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a broader, accelerating trend. The world is slowly moving away from the dollar. In October 2023, Pakistan announced that all transactions related to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure initiative, would be settled in yuan, not dollars. China even granted Pakistan the authority to issue yuan-denominated letters of credit, a significant step in deepening financial integration. In Africa, the trend is even more pronounced. Zimbabwe and Angola have both added the yuan to their official foreign exchange reserves. Zimbabwe has gone a step further, designating the yuan as legal tender, meaning it can be used for everyday transactions alongside the local currency. In November 2022, the China-Africa Cross-Border Yuan Settlement Center was officially launched, making it easier for African nations to trade in yuan and bypass the dollar entirely. These moves reflect a growing frustration with the dollar-dominated system. Many developing countries have watched as the United States weaponizes the dollar and SWIFT to punish adversaries, and worry they could be next. They see China's rise, its growing trade networks, and its willingness to offer an alternative, and they're taking the opportunity. This doesn't mean the dollar is about to collapse. Far from it. The U.S. currency still dominates global reserves, trade invoices, and debt markets, but its share is slowly eroding. And for the first time in decades, there's a credible alternative on the rise. What this means for the future. The story of Russia, India, and the yuan is more than a tale of energy trade. It's a preview of a world where financial power is more fragmented, where currencies compete, and where the rules that govern the post-war order no longer feel inevitable. For Russia, the shift to yuan payments is a lifeline, a way to keep selling oil and buying goods despite Western isolation. For China, it's a strategic victory, further embedding the yuan in global trade and weakening the dollar's monopoly. For India, it's a humbling reminder that aspiration and reality don't always align. And for the rest of us, it's a signal. The financial architecture that has defined our world for 70 years is under strain. Whether it adapts, fractures, or transforms into something new will shape the next chapter of global history. One thing is certain. The age of unquestioned dollar dominance is over. What comes next is still being written. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the forces reshaping our world. We'll keep bringing you the stories that matter, the context that clarifies, and the analysis that makes sense of it all.